Hello, dreamers, and welcome to the 311th episode of California Dreaming. I'm your host, Roseanne, and I want to start off by thanking you all for listening, and I want to take a moment to tell you how you can help support this podcast. This is an independent show, which means I depend on the listeners to help keep it going, and there are a number of ways that you can help. You can leave a nice rating and a review on Apple Podcasts or whichever platforms you listen to your shows on. It makes it a little bit easier for new listeners to find us. You can follow the show on Facebook, Instagram, and X, and if you have $1 or $2 to spare each month, you can become a subscriber over on Patreon, where for starting at just $1 a month, you will enjoy access to dozens of full-length episodes that you won't hear anywhere else. I want to thank you all for the comments about what a good deal that is, that it's worth the $1 a month that you pay just to have an extra episode, and I appreciate that so much because every little bit helps. We just finished a several months long 16-part series on the 2011 murder of 15-year-old Seth Jackson over there in Florida. And up next, we're going to have some companion episodes to go along with the most recent case that we talked about here in 4 parts. The case involving Leticia Stout, the 2020 murder of her 11-year-old stepson Gannon. There's so much more over on Patreon, so please, if you have a moment, follow the link in the show notes and check it out for yourself. There may be an episode or 2 that are unlocked, usually the first episode of a series. I want to say the series on Amber Hibberling. There's about, I think, 6 parts of that, and the first one, I believe, is unlocked. Go check that out. If it's not, hit me up. I will go and unlock it. I do have some thank yous for subscribers that have joined Patreon or made changes to their pledge in the past 6 or 7 months or so, but I haven't yet sent anything out to them in the mail. I'm going to do that in the near future, and that way I can jot down in my notes your location, your country, your state, province, whichever. There's lots of subscribers with same or similar names, so I started mentioning your state or country so you'll know that I'm talking about you. And I will get to that as soon as I can. I'm anxious to get to those Leticia Stout recordings. But anyway, every subscription helps, and I appreciate all of you. And I also need to provide you with this warning. This episode may contain graphic details involving extremely severe acts of child abuse. And while the focus of these episodes is meant to discuss how exactly the story evolved over the course of 6 or 7 years into what we became aware of when the story actually broke in August of 2023, we may talk about some of the details of the abuse that occurred, which may be disturbing for some listeners. In the past, I usually bypass some of the worst details, but if there is anything particularly troubling that I do decide to leave in, I will provide further in-episode warnings and timestamps to jump to. That being said, listener discretion is advised. And one more thing, I posted on my personal Facebook yesterday that my dog Fred was getting his nails cut, and the groomer, he seemed very ambitious, so he was like, I don't need a muzzle on him, and I said, okay. I said I could help you to kind of hold his head in place. And yeah, sure as shit, Fred bit me. So my left arm, thankfully, because I'm right-handed, is in a lot of pain, and I can't type right now. So luckily, before the groomer showed up yesterday, I did finish this episode. I did finish writing it. But I was about to start the 3rd part, but now this happened. So I'm kind of just taking it easy. I'm really upset. I couldn't sleep last night because it was so uncomfortable. I have 2 puncture wounds in my arm from Fred's bite. And I feel really bad, and I'm mad at myself. I can't be mad at Fred because I should have insisted on a muzzle that would have helped everybody. I appreciate this guy being, thinking that he can handle it. And he bit the guy too, but it didn't break his skin the way it broke mine. And yeah, it's bad. So if I sound a little run down, that's because I did not sleep at all last night. Anyway, sorry for the extra long intro. let's get to today's episode.
They're going to think you're torturing him. Stop it. I know you're not, but it looks like you are. Okay, Russell. I'm only going to say it one more time, and then you're going to lose the privilege to eat dinner.
Very
Chad,
nutritious.
what are you doing over there? No texting at the dinner table. No texting.
Let me see it. Let me see it.
I see it.
We should clarify that in our house, all our kids know that cell phones are free game for parents, so we can monitor safety.
Yeah, no kid ever said, "Yay, I'm so glad my parents read my text messages." Said no.
What is this? I really like you. Hold on.
I did not say that.
How do you work this stupid phone?
The only downside to giving your kids a flip phone is I swear I have to remember how to work it every time I go through it. Who are you texting?
No one.
Any girlfriend?
Whoa. I really like you. I saw you in my dreams last night.
I'm telling you, it's not her, it was her brother. Look, go down. She said, "I'm so sorry, that was my brother."
Did
How
she?
do I go?
I saw you in
Oh my gosh, sorry, that was my brother. What is the nature of your relationship with this individual? I mean, there's like 300 texts in here.
Do you like her, or do you just like her? She's a new friend.
That is really, really messy. I don't know.
I seen him with her, and he likes her.
Does she like you back?
Probably. No, she thinks he's annoying.
My bedroom was taken away for 7 months, and then you give it back like a couple weeks ago.
I don't think our viewers know that.
You've been sleeping on a beanbag.
I've been sleeping on a beanbag since October, and they gave my room back like 2 weeks ago. Oh, I'll give you the reason why I lost my bedroom. I think so. I think this is the reason. At least this is the reason that's been in my head. It's pretty funny, but now that I look back, I mean, it's pretty depressing.
No, we never told our viewers.
That I woke Russell up at 2 in the morning and told him that we're going to Disneyland and he has to pack. And he got up and made his bed all neatly and then packed all his clothes in a suitcase. And then he walked out the door and I'm like, Russell, and he's like, what? And he's all happy. Has his sunglasses on.
Do you think it's funny? Because
And then I walk out.
if you think it's funny, then that was 7 months ago. Maybe you need longer without a bedroom.
It was not funny.
Russell got the big bedroom and Chad got the smaller bedroom. And Russell's bigger bedroom also had a bathroom. But what you guys didn't know was Chad didn't get any room. He didn't get anything. He was sleeping on the floor in the family room. Abby, we took the phone away from Abby in November. And you may never get the phone back.
Probably not.
Now I have no friends.
You can play with friends.
No, like I don't have friends.
I don't have friends either.
I literally like told my friends I'm not hanging out with them anymore because they say some pretty messed up stuff.
I don't even know where they live. They're pretty far away.
So, summer goal, become the best athlete I possibly can.
If you cut one more thing in my house,
Chopping its head off.
I'm going to take the scissors, look at me, and I'm going to cut its head off.
Grandma will be so mad.
So what are you going to do?
Are you gonna cut anything else?
No.
You promise? Look at Mama. I just got a text message from Eve's teacher, and she said that Eve did not pack a lunch today, and can I bring a lunch over to the school? This happens quite often when you're raising children, because I know that her teacher is uncomfortable with her being hungry and not having a lunch, and it would ease her discomfort if I came to the school with a lunch. But I responded and just said Eve is responsible for making her lunches in the morning, and she actually told me she did pack a lunch. So the natural outcome is she's just going to need to be hungry, and hopefully Hopefully nobody gives her food and nobody steps in and gives her a lunch. I'm gonna explain the rules to this.
7?
We're done.
Julie, stop. We need their homework.
So you're all like, what? I have your attention now?
Mm-hmm.
Is that it? You're all
One of my
gonna
stuff
listen?
is in there, so.
If you have something in the bag that you would like out, you can pay cash for it. So you learn the value of your items. Or you can give what? Dad, I'll let you take the conversation from here.
You can do an equivalent value chore to get it back.
What's it?
And whatever isn't claimed by the end of the day goes in the garbage.
So what you just heard was the audio from a YouTube video compilation of some troubling moments on 8 Passengers. At first, it started out with Chad and R wrestling on the ground in the house. We hear R scream, followed by Ruby complaining to Chad that they're going to think you're torturing him and to stop it. Chad says he's not torturing him, but she says it looks like he is. Ruby turns the camera towards herself as she says, "I'm only going to say it one more time. Then you're going to lose the privilege to eat dinner." Eating, last I checked, was a basic human right. Perhaps eating good, quality, fresh, healthy foods might be a privilege. It shouldn't be. There is that disparity between the wealthy and the poor when it comes to nutrition. And that's a topic that can quickly turn into a political issue, but this isn't about having and not having. This is Ruby Franke actually using the withholding of a meal as a threat and a punishment, and she did it on a video that she uploaded to her channel, telling the world that the consequence for her 2 boys engaging in a little bit of horseplay is to go hungry for the night. The video then cuts to the family seated at the dinner table eating. Ruby and Kevin catch Chad texting at the table. Dad demands that he hand his phone over to him as Kevin turns to the camera that Ruby is holding and explains that all the kids have a cell phone with the understanding that they, the parents, have the authority to look through their phones at any time, which is not unreasonable. None of this so far is unreasonable. Texting at the dinner table is a no-no, and being able to monitor what your kids are doing on their phones. I'm totally on board with all of this. The kids have flip phones, so there's only so much that they can do with it anyway. So Kevin starts reading some of the text messages, and it's meant to humiliate Chad. It's really embarrassing as some girl is flirting with him, and there are like hundreds of messages from her in his phone that Kevin is like kind of scrolling through pretty quickly. I don't know how interested he actually is. I mean, I don't know. It depends on your kid and their parents. I wouldn't really want to embarrass my kid on YouTube like that, but they all seem to think it was funny. It just did not sit well with some of their viewers, especially in hindsight. The next clip is the one that we shared in part 1 where they talk about Chad losing his bedroom for 7 months. There is a little bit more to the story. The main thing was him tricking his little brother into packing up and getting ready to go to Disneyland. There was also some follow-up with Chad having pointed a BB gun at his little brother, which is a no-no. He shouldn't have been doing that. I think I played a more extended version of that video that Ruby had uploaded. And beyond just Chad losing his bedroom, one of the girls lost her phone, and they're all kind of saying that they don't think she will ever get her phone back. The next clip is one that I did talk about in part 1. It's the one where E's little plush kitty is being threatened with decapitation if the child, quote, ever cuts one more thing in my house, says Ruby. Of course, the child immediately bursts into tears, and one of her older sisters immediately gets down on her knees to try to comfort the crying child. And the sister asks her, "Are you going to cut anything else?" And she says no. Then the clip cuts to the video that I also talked about in part 1, where Ruby talks about E forgetting her lunch. She's by herself in her car. And the consequence of that is she gets to go hungry and hopefully nobody gives her any food. The next clip was a little bit out of context, so I went to Google to see if I could find out exactly what was going on. What you heard right after the whole forgetting the lunch consequence, being going hungry for the entire school day, was Ruby and Kevin talking to the kids about buying their belongings back or doing a chore that is equivalent of the cost of said belonging. Ruby says, if you have something that's in the bag that you would like out, you can pay cash for it so you can learn the value of your items, or you can give what? And the camera turns to Kevin and he says, you can do an equivalent value chore to get it back, and whatever isn't claimed by the end of the day goes into the garbage. And that was the end of the clip. There was actually more to that video, so I'm not sure why whoever edited that YouTube clip together cut all that other stuff out. So I had to see for myself because I hadn't really seen the whole thing. Like I said, I Googled it and I found a whole article on thedailymail.com about this incident. It was dated just weeks prior to Ruby Franke and Jodi Hildebrandt being arrested. The article about this was written July 10th, 2023. And what was going on is that people were reaching back in time and discussing the Franke's 8-passenger videos on TikTok and how troubling they were. And this was happening in the weeks and months and possibly even years, however long Jodi and Ruby were together. People were going back and re-uploading clips from 8 Passengers onto TikTok and really ripping Ruby apart for her parenting style. And that's what was happening to the Frankes and to Jodi Hildebrandt, in the time prior to the arrest. So they were getting like some bad publicity online even before they were caught doing what they were doing to the 2 youngest children. Like I said, that article was dated July 10th, 2023, but it was updated September 4th, 2023, just a handful of days after the news of Ruby and Jodi's arrest broke. And like I said, we know that the 8 Passengers channel had been getting slammed for some time prior to their arrest, but I also found out that Ruby stopped uploading videos in January of 2022 and then officially terminated 8 Passengers on August 2nd, 2023, as a result of Ruby violating YouTube's terms of service. So just 4 weeks prior to her arrest, she ended it. However, she stopped uploading earlier in the year. She hung on to the channel until she knew she couldn't. The headline on this article reads, Ruby Franke is slammed for threatening to throw all of her kids' belongings in the trash, including their homework, if they fail to buy them back from her with cash or by doing chores. The article says, a Mormon mom of 6 has been slammed for making her kids pay to get their own belongings from her, either by forking over cash or doing chores, or else she warned them that they will have to watch their stuff get thrown into the garbage. Former social media star Ruby Franke, who racked up more than 2.2 million subscribers for documenting her and her 6 kids' day-to-day endeavors on YouTube before she suddenly stopped last January, from Utah, is facing fierce fire after a clip of her controversial attempt to teach her kids the value of their items resurfaced online. In the video, which originally came from one of her YouTube videos but was recently uploaded to TikTok by an account called Cancel YouTube Vloggers, Ruby explained that she had gathered some of her kids' most prized possessions and that she was going to chuck them into the trash if they didn't pay her. I went around the house and she began the clip before she was interrupted by her son Chad, who exclaimed, "You're throwing them away? That's my homework." Ruby, who held up a garbage bag full of stuff, then explained that a new rule was going to be put in place to ensure that the kids would treat their stuff with the utmost respect. "Do I have your attention now? You're all going to listen?" Ruby continued. If you have something in the bag that you would like out, you can pay cash for it so you can learn the value of your items. Ruby's husband, Kevin Franke, then interjected, or you can do an equivalent value chore to get it back. The camera turned to show Chad looking horrified over the news as Kevin announced, whatever isn't claimed by the end of the day goes into the garbage. Many people were left outraged by the video, which got more than 5.7 million views, and they took to the comment section to share their disgust. These parents seriously need to be investigated. This isn't parenting. This is intentionally, emotionally hurting their children, wrote one person. That's literally his homework that he did, and she's making him pay for it, another astounded viewer added. The article showed screenshots of some of the comments, including, "If she was my mom, I would have ran away a long time ago. I'll bet she'll punish them for having bad grades too. Oh, sorry, I don't have my assignment. My mom threw it away." So she wants them to have perfect grades, yet took the homework away? Make it make sense. I lived in a house like this. It's abuse and a power trip. How is CPS not involved? He needs to do a chore to get it back. Doing homework was the chore. And that was just a handful of the comments. So now, Dreamers, we're going to take a look at the second part of the Hulu docuseries. We went over part 1 in the last episode, and it left off with the onset of the decline of 8 passengers. The second part opens with another YouTuber, maybe a TikToker, wondering out loud, like, what the F is up with the Frankies? Asking if they're okay, obviously not. And to literally get off of YouTube and actually care for your children, because it was coming across pretty loud and clear, even in the videos that Ruby did upload, that the kids did not want to be in Ruby's videos anymore. Just looking at their faces, viewers could see they did not want to do it. Sherry, in her interview in the docuseries, pointed out that their numbers were steadily declining, and whatever interactions they were having with viewers online was all negative. Chad himself says, "We were basically canceled, like our views just tanked. We lost like 90% of our income." It then cuts to a video of Ruby and Kevin sitting next to each other at a desk, and this is being filmed from a distance, like Ruby isn't holding her phone or her camera like she normally is. And we hear her say, "What has happened in our home over the last few weeks is a taste of the real world, and we have not filtered it from our kids, and they are seeing it, and they're like, wow." We then hear Chad saying, "I remember us getting some very expensive lawyer involved, and I remember him specifically suggesting to her to make an apology." And to that, Kevin said, Ruby's response was, "Over my dead body. I'm not sorry. I'm saving my family. We're going to show the world what real parenting looks like. We're going to show the world what it's like to make impossibly tough decisions because you love a child." It then cuts to a video clip of Ruby looking directly into the camera as she says, "Buckle up, guys." She lets out a deep sigh, and then she says, "I have something to share." Then Ruby looks like she's about to cry and then covers her face with both of her hands. We then get the opening title sequence before it comes back to Ruby talking into the camera as she says, "Okay, I've just been pondering about all the changes that have happened and asking myself what changes I want to make in my life." She pauses, goes silent, and is just thinking about something. Maybe what she could possibly say to undo the damage that's been done. Ruby looked tired, frustrated, stressed. She looks a mess. Ruby next says, "Kevin and I have been looking. We have no brand deals coming in, so we have enough to keep going." But then Chad's voiceover in the docuseries cuts in and he says, after the cancellation, there was a very distinct switch in the kind of content that she was filming. This is often what happens when things go awry. is it really brings us back to home base, which is I am a child of God. I am the center. That is where I am centered. And so I've been brought back to base. We hear Chad again as he says she went from a fun, energetic, laughable mom to a very serious religious teacher. Then we see Ruby say, I decided that I was going to have more prayers to get through the day. She starts to get emotional here as she says, because I feel like I've been working. And then Ruby exhales pretty deeply, but then it cuts to a different video of Ruby filming herself in the kitchen. And I guess she's finishing her thought. And Dreamers, I'm sorry if this is sounding really complicated and kind of puzzle pieced together. It's just the way the documentary was put together. It works well when you're watching it, but trying to describe it if you haven't seen it. And I want to try to keep the time frame straight. What's being said in the videos from the past versus what's being said in the interviews for the documentary. So anyway, Ruby says, this is literally the way that God intended our children to be raised up. What I am seeing is that you're upset with the outcome for being mischievous. Here it shows Ruby speaking to R as his face is blurred in this one. And instead of being humble, you're being selfish, she says. Chad says in his interview, the 8 passengers' followers were furious from what I remember. She didn't care about the followers at that point. She wanted to move on to something else. And for her, I get that. It's just what she moved on to was pretty much selling her soul to someone else. So yeah. And that's about when Ruby and Kevin begin to seek out help in the form of therapy or counseling for Chad specifically. And that's when they find Jodi. The next thing we see in the documentary is a video clip of Jodi conducting one of her connections classes. Brandon Patrick, the therapist that we heard from in part 1, is back, and he says, Jodi was a businesswoman and she would prey on the weak. She knew how to hit on a pain point, the biggest pain point for people in order to turn it into profit. It then says on the screen 10 years earlier, as Brandon Patrick continued, in 2010, I had been shadowing Jodi for about a year, and by that time, I knew that something was off. One was that she refused to pay me, so that was one thing. On top of that, Jodi seemed very angry towards men. And I watched couples get torn apart again and again, and I realized I can't do this. But my neighbors were going to Jodi. My friends were going to Jodi, and I knew what she was doing, and I knew how destructive it was. So I had to kind of keep tabs and watch what was going on. It was probably a year later that she opened up Connections. We are then shown a video montage of Jodi's Connections classroom and then some testimonials from attendees. Brandon continued, Connections was an opportunity for her to scale her business. She wasn't doing one-on-one sessions. She could work with 20 people at a time and make a lot more money. And she was excellent at exploiting Mormon anxiety, being pure, being sinless, being perfect. But Connections was more than just therapy. It was this community that she created, a whole platform of people that were drinking her Kool-Aid. It was like a church within the church, and Jodi was the prophet. We hear again from that friend who introduced Ruby to Jodi, her friend Paige, or maybe former friend, as she says, Jodi very much with many people became the savior. Jodi absolutely was my God, and it was to her that you were looking for forgiveness, and it was to her that you were looking for redemption. And there was this piece of Jodi that when you brought somebody into Connections, it very much felt like a pat on the head. I know that Ruby had already been leaning towards it, but to get Kevin on board, Ruby wanted help. So as the viewers watching this documentary, next we see on the screen October 2019. It's superimposed over a really beautiful aerial view of Utah, as Kevin says. I remember the first real introduction to it. and it was a love versus lust workshop. Ruby was just into it, and I noticed that so many of the women in that room were just laser focused. They were intent. They were on the edge of their chairs. And I remember turning to Ruby and whispering, "This feels like a man-hating club. This is a cult." Paige next says, "And I remember the first conference Kevin went to. He said, 'This is a cult.' And I laughed and I thought, this is a good thing and this can help you and you're just being too stubborn to look at it." The documentarian asked, "Do you feel you put pressure on Kevin?" Paige laughed and said, "I'll make this really easy for you. We put so much pressure on Kevin. So much." We next hear Ruby again as she says, "I am studying under Jodi Hildebrandt and the Connections classroom. And what she's teaching us, I have never learned anywhere else." The documentarian then asked Kevin, "Why did Ruby like it so much?" Kevin replied, "Because it validated things that had been bugging her for a long time. To be honest, we were pretty lost. And Ruby believed that this was the roadmap back to the place that we both wanted to go. And she sat me down and she said, 'I am concerned about our marriage, and I'd like to invite you to join a Connections men's group.' It was all online, and Jodi hopped on. 'Who wants to get us started?' And so then some guy said, 'I'll check in,' and then just started going down a list of stuff. It was a support for addiction." The documentarian asked, "Addictions to what?" Kevin replied, "Everything. Most men were in there because of addiction to pornography. There were men who would get in and they would report, 'I've relapsed.' And Jodi would say, 'How long are you going to keep choosing this? Do you realize that you're losing your family?' And this poor guy is sitting there, dejected and miserable. And Jodi would then add to this and say, 'Look at Kevin. He makes choices every day that are responsible. And he stands up and he's a man.' And it felt so good. And I began to look forward to it because all I wanted was praise. And you want to know what felt the most good? Was seeing the way my wife was looking at me." The interviewer asked, "How was she looking at you?" And Kevin replied, "The way I always wanted her to look at me." The documentary then shows us a video that Ruby took of just the two of them having a sweet moment in the kitchen as she's making breakfast. Kevin, his voice comes over again and he says, "Over time, there was a shared passion for one another. Our relationship felt better. There was so much less conflict. We both felt like there was purpose again." We then hear from Chad as he says, "My mom and dad were starting to use the language that Jodi was using. Things got better as the documentary shows nicer, more supportive comments on their YouTube channel. She was happier and she never really shouted anymore," Sherry added. "She pretty much stopped when Jodi started working with them." Chad said, "We were really like a happy family again." So next we hear from friend Paige, and she says, "When Ruby and Kevin joined, Jodi incorporated them very quickly. One of the ways they were elevated quickly was the fact that she allowed Ruby to go in and to train as a coach when Ruby was relatively new, even to doing therapy." It then shows some videos of Ruby speaking to Connections class attendees, and we hear Kevin as he says, "That was the point where we began to become the face and the voice of Connections." The documentary also interviewed other Connections attendees, a woman named Tressa, but I think Sherry pronounces it Teresa, but it's Tresa, Tressa. I'm going to say Tressa. Heyman. She happened to be a friend and a teacher of Sherry's, and she said, "There were 3 friends that recommended Connections to us, and we saw the Frankies on there. Ruby and Kevin were on there, and I was like, ooh, They have kids at our school. We kind of know who this family is, and they seem like they were kind of second tier to Jodi. This is super interesting, and they were sharing a lot of things, a lot of vulnerable things, a lot of personal things, very personal things. And then it cuts to a video of Kevin sitting next to two other husbands on a stage speaking, as he says, "The only way I know how to make sex work is through lust." Of this, Paige said, with the other coaches, there was a happiness that they were going to be a part of it, but also came some curiosity because we had all done a lot of work. But I started seeing that Jodi was really careful with who she collected. And it was evident that what was most important to Jodi was having their influence and their audience over their understanding and their comprehension. Brandon Patrick next says, Jodi was always enamored by money and fame. I saw her treat clients differently according to their status. She said to me one time, so a client came in who was well known and had a lot of money. We really got to take care of this one. And I thought, well, that's odd. Like, we're therapists, we're trained to not care. The interviewer, the documentarian, asked, what do you think she meant? And Brandon replied, I think she was salivating some. She was salivating about money and power. And so that excited her. What can I do with a client with a lot of money and influence and power? And of this, Chad then says, around that time was just the big breaking point for 8 passengers, where Ruby just called it quits. And it went from 8 passengers to Moms of Truth. It just all transferred over to Jodi's business. So as Chad was talking in the documentary, it's showing a dramatization of someone changing their settings on their YouTube account. They go in and edit, they delete the name 8 passengers and type in the new name, Moms of Truth. Lisa McLean, one of the neighbors interviewed in the first episode, said, I remember looking on my social media and I got an invitation for joining this Moms of Truth group on Facebook. And it wasn't just me, as her husband said he did as well. The other neighbor, Cindy Codney, also said, Ruby sent out an invitation to the entire neighborhood, inviting all of us to join Moms of Truth. And I was like, heck yeah. We then hear Chad say, she was all in on connections at that point. She was all in. So then in the documentary, we see a clip of Ruby answering questions from her viewers when they came to find the channel was no longer 8 passengers, but instead Moms of Truth. Ruby got emotional about discussing the reasons behind the change. And she put her little spin on what actually happened by saying, you wonder where I've been on my vlogs. And here she starts to cry. It's to save my kids. No amount of money, and I'm telling you, I was making millions, and I left it because my kids were being hurt with entitlement. They were being hurt with people's advice, and they didn't have a mother at the front. Kevin's voice cuts in and says, she believed inside that we were destined to be part of something earth-shifting, part of God's work, and would talk about this stuff all the time. Jodi would talk about this stuff all the time. We really felt like something big was coming, and it was just around the corner. And dreamers, that something was COVID. So we transitioned to March of 2020, and the news breaking of the CDC classifying COVID-19 as a global pandemic plays in the documentary. Kevin said, when I think about everything that happened in 2020, it had really affected our family. We have COVID. We have a 5.8 earthquake in the west side of Salt Lake City. And they show some footage of some riots that were happening also in 2020. I believe those are Black Lives Matter riots. But even though there was all of this going on, it got exciting. Like, this is really happening. And we're here and we're living this. The interviewer asked what I think we might all be having the same thought at this moment as we watch this. But he asked Kevin, what is really happening? And Kevin replied, that the world was ending. Everyone else is going to burn, but we felt like we were on the right side of it. Sherry added, the last days in the scripture are a period of however long that like the world's going to burn or a plague's going to come and destroy everyone. And then Christ comes and the world is saved and everyone can be happy again. But to get there, there's a period of just like absolute hell. The interviewer asked, did Ruby think that was happening? And Sherry replied, she thought it was the start of it, for sure. Next in the documentary, we then get to see another one of Ruby's whack-ass videos. She's getting ready for the end of days, for the second coming. She's holding her phone and panning across the room as she gleefully and vomit-inducingly yells, are you guys ready to become a food prepper with me? It's gross. In her normal tone, she says, no, emergency prepper. Ruby then does another take and she again shrieks, are you ready to become an emergency prepper with me? Awkward silence follows since Ruby is just standing there talking to herself until we hear the interviewer ask Kevin, so did you really believe that this was the end of the world, that Christ was returning? The most adamant we've seen Kevin thus far happened just at this point in the documentary when he answered, oh, absolutely. The interviewer then asked, but if the world was ending, did it occur to you that maybe you wouldn't go to heaven? That maybe you'd go to hell? Kevin quickly said never. It never crossed our minds because we were preparing for it. And we weren't alone. It then cuts to some video clips of Ruby and Jodi stockpiling food. I mean, like seriously. I want to say that the compound that they were arrested in, it had 2 stories underground that was meant to be, I guess, a fallout shelter of some sort for when the second coming is about to happen or nuclear war, whatever. And it's full of so much food and whatever supplies they think they're going to need to survive the second coming. They're getting ready for the world to end, preppers as they're called, I guess. And the clips of Jodi speaking about the end are playing through until we hear Sherry say, Ruby would often talk about how Jodi had been called by God and was doing really amazing work, and that God had also built up Ruby with her channel, and like the two were meant to combine together to do God's will, to share the truth to the world. Kevin next said, we genuinely believed that Jodi was inspired, called by God, representative of God, chosen by God. It then says across the screen that they're in St. George, Utah. And all this belief all culminated in May of 2021. Jodi calls Ruby. She was waiting and sobbing into the phone. Apparently, she was being haunted by hooded shadow figures that would just appear surrounding her bed at night. And she said Satan had it out for her. And we believed it. We wanted to believe it. The interviewer asked Kevin, why? And he replied, because we were in the state of mind where we were ready for something big to happen. We were expecting it. We just weren't expecting this. We drove down to Jodi's house, and this was to give support and help her. She was distraught, to say the least. We then hear from Chad again, and he says, her home was amazing. Like it's this mansion, a beautiful mansion. She gave us a tour, and that tour lasted probably 2 hours because there was just so much. She had like 4 levels of the house, and the whole bottom 2 levels, which were these like underground storage units, and it was just for her food and wilderness supplies and everything. It just surprised me that like the house looked like she was housing for kids or housing for family, but there was no one living there. She's by herself. So the house, dreamers, where most of the severe abuse of Ruby's youngest children R and E, this is where it took place. I looked up a little bit more information about the property, and I found some details on Realtor.com from just a day or so ago. It's dated March 17th. I think I was writing this last week. And it says, the $5 million property where former Mormon influencer Ruby Franke and her accomplice Jodi Hildebrandt were arrested for brutally abusing 2 children has finally been snapped up less than a month after a Hulu documentary laid bare the horrific details of their shocking case. Devil in the Family, The Fall of Ruby Franke, which hit the streaming platform February 27th, featured interviews with family members of the Franke family, including her 2 eldest children, Sherry and Chad, and her husband Kevin, as well as never-before-seen footage of the family inside their upscale Salt Lake City mansion. The documentary also shined a light on the heinous crimes that took place in and around Hildebrandt's property in Ivins, Utah, which was raided by officers soon after Franke's child R, who was 12 at the time, fleeing the home and begging a neighbor for help while displaying visible signs of neglect. Soon after, police arrived at Hildebrandt's home, where they located R's younger sister E, then 10, inside a closet, while a more thorough search of the property resulted in the discovery of multiple torture devices, including rope, handcuffs, and cayenne pepper paste, according to People magazine. Franke, 42, and Hildebrandt, 55, were then handcuffed and charged with aggravated child abuse, and in February of 2024, they were each sentenced to 4 consecutive prison terms, which could see them serving up to 30 years in jail. Just 1 month before they were sentenced, Hildebrandt listed her Ivins property for sale with an asking price of $5.3 million. However, it was soon temporarily taken off the market after a judge ruled that she had to wait until her sentencing before selling it. In the year since, the property, which the listing described as a true masterpiece with stunning features and finishes, has languished on the market with little interest, leading to a price reduction in March of 2024 when the price was lowered to $4.99 million. It may well be that the homes linked to the horrifying crimes of Franke and Hildebrandt made buyers shy away, despite being described in its listing as having stunning features that will take your breath away. However, the release of the Hulu documentary drew in plenty of new interest in the 5-bedroom, 4.5 bathroom home, with Realtor.com data revealing that visits to the listing page increased 18-fold in the 7-day period between February 26th, the day before the premiere of the documentary, and March 4th, when compared to the previous week. And now, more than a year after it was initially listed, one buyer has seemingly managed to move past the home's history and put in an offer on the property, with Realtor.com data revealing that the home is currently pending sale. It is unclear whether the latest asking price of $4.99 million was offered. The next thing I have written in my notes is that there are strange things afoot at crazy Jodi's house. Let's see what I was talking about. I'm so sorry, dreamers. I could not sleep last night. I'm tired and I'm starting to feel it right now. I'm about to hit a wall. I might take a break in a little bit and then come back to this maybe tomorrow morning. But I really wanted to try to get this out for you today. So there were some weird things that were going on while the Frankes were visiting Jodi's house. And it doesn't even really seem like calling it a house is enough. Chad called it a mansion. I'm more inclined to call it a compound, only because it's so isolated and surrounded by nothing but desert, dirt, rocks, mountains, dried up shrubs, and future tumbleweeds. Of this, Kevin said, "While we were there at the house, there were things that happened that I can't explain. There was a tremendous crash in the basement directly beneath us, and there was nothing. In that same visit, high up on the glass, I saw a big handprint, fingers that came out like that," and Kevin held his hand over his fingers to demonstrate the extraordinary length these fingers were on the glass. The fingers that came out like that outside of my hand, and I didn't have an explanation for that. The interviewer asked, "Do you have a photo of that handprint?" And Kevin replied, "I do." He reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and showed some kind of smudge on a glass. It really doesn't look like anything to me, and I don't see a handprint. The interviewer asked, could someone else maybe have caused that smudge? Did you believe that you were really in the presence of Satan? Kevin took a deep breath and replied, I did. And he expanded on that. I believed it was otherworldly or it was supernatural. Jodi's bishop was also there blessing her, blessing the house, and they're showing pictures on the documentary of all the stuff that Kevin's talking about. So of the bishop, Kevin said, he just said, I can't keep doing this. We need to come up with another solution. Ruby suggested the idea that Jodi come to our house and she will be able to heal. Ruby said, this is the second coming. This is God returning to the earth because she is chosen by God. Jodi plays such an important part in it. We drove all the way back and she began to live in our home. We next cut to Sherry as she discusses this whole thing with Jodi moving into the Franke home, and she says, I remember Ruby calling me and she says, you know, you have a couple of hours to take whatever you need out of your room and she's going to have it. I was moving out in 2 weeks anyway to go to college, so I figured I only have to deal with this for 2 weeks. Chad said, I remember thinking nothing of it. I thought of her as a friend. I thought of her as a praised therapist of mine. I had respect and love for her, but also when Jodi moved into the home, I wasn't so much of an issue anymore. It was now my baby brother and my baby sister that were more of an issue. The documentary then cuts to a video clip of Ruby talking into the camera for a moment as she says, they're perfect for Easter, when she suddenly turns her head to the left and sternly says, no, you are not entitled to talk while I am recording. Sit back up there and be quiet. Chad's voice comes back on as he says, my little brother was kind of talking back. My little sister was being rude to my mom at some points. We then hear Ruby's voice shouting, go downstairs now, both of you. Chad continued, to my mom, that felt like evil and she wanted help. We then hear Jodi's voice from a computer as she says, children are not entitled to privacy. This is not an age thing. It's an accountability thing. And you know, when I read that, I thought that was just some bullshit right there. And that sounds exactly like a complete contradiction when Jodi first says children are not entitled to privacy and then follows that up with this is not an age thing. I mean, excuse me, but isn't the actual real and exact idea behind being a child? Is it that it's based on being an age thing? When she says children are not entitled to privacy, she is saying that human beings who are over the age of 0 and under the age of 18 are not entitled to privacy. By saying child, she made it completely about being an age thing. So I don't understand how she can sit there and say that is not an age thing, that it's an accountability thing, which everyone, as soon as a person learns what it means to take accountability, and I'm going to say that can be learned as soon as a child has vocabulary and a couple thousand words, that they will start to be able to have memories and remember things when they understand more complex emotions beyond just being happy or sad, but some deeper emotions like empathy and sorrow. I think we can expect children to begin to have a basic understanding of accountability. So really what it sounds like to me is Jodi hasn't developed a way of working with people through counseling and therapy, but just stringing fancy words and catchphrases together that make her sound like she's come up with something new, something forward thinking, some fancy way of delivering her services. Sherry next says, we weren't to tell anybody that Jodi was there. I thought it was weird that a therapist would move in with her patients. I remember looking up Jodi just to see, who she was. I learned that she's not a psychologist, even though she always has claimed to be one. Just from reviews online, I read that she destroyed families. She wasn't even married. Her kids didn't talk to her. And I remember being like, why are we working with this woman? And then Chad says, Sherry looked her up and found that her license had been revoked. And I think she went to my mom about that and was like, Mom, her license was revoked for this. And my mom didn't think anything of it. The documentarian asked, what did you think of it? And Chad replied, to me, that all seemed like people who were just attacking her because she was so morally correct and so spiritual. Kevin then said, Sherry, her radar was beeping from the first moment and we shut it down so fast. She didn't have time to get into the details. Jodi had been forthright about those things. If you Google me, you're going to find this, this, and this. And that was from this former client who was particularly nasty. And it made us believe that troubled people are doing everything they can to attack Jodi. But after Jodi came into the picture, weird things started happening at our house. The documentary then cuts to a video clip of Jodi, and in my notes I wrote down Jodi's possessed. There's someone walking in front of the camera. I'm assuming it's Kevin, and the one filming is Ruby, and they push open a door that looks like it leads to a closet or a storage area, and Jodi is kind of hunched over or kneeling, and her head is down. It looks like her eyes are closed, and her hair appears to be damp or kind of stringy, but she looks a mess. The camera is really close up to her. As Kevin says in his interview, Jodi would go into these possessed trances. It then shows a clip of Jodi leaning against a wall. Her head is tilted back and to the side a little. Her eyes are closed and she seems to have this distressed look on her face. Her breathing is audible and she's taking really short, quick breaths. Suddenly, her face scrunches up real tightly and her eyes were closed, but she closed them even tighter. She pursed her mouth and her face begins to kind of turn red, and she starts jerking around and making grunting noises, and her face continues to contort to where she looks like she's either in pain or in constipation. I mean, I'm not trying to make light of any of this sort of stuff. I'm just really skeptical about it all. Being possessed, spirits taking over bodies, speaking through people by infiltrating them. This is what Jodi wants this to appear to be happening to her. And Kevin added she would start speaking in other voices. We then see Jodi looking like she's sleeping or in a trance or dreaming or something, and she's saying, she's mine, she knows. And then we see Jodi, I think, laying on the ground, and Ruby's next to her, trying to comfort her and hold her. And Jodi appears to be hitting herself across the chest with her arm. And she's saying in a relatively gravelly sort of distorted voice, I own her, as she squeezes the hand of the person that's next to her. I believe it's Ruby. I'm pretty sure it's Ruby. We then hear Kevin say in this interview, and Ruby believed it was meant to be, and that me and her were meant to help Jodi overcome this. The interviewer asked, how did you think that you could help her? And Kevin replied, casting the evil spirits out, exorcising them out. We then see Jodi sitting on the ground in a corner, looking like she's silently crying or deeply thinking, with her hands covering her face as she continues to say, she's mine. Kevin then said, I would place my hands over her head, and then I would command the demons to depart, and then I would state every name of Jesus Christ that I could think of, and those evil spirits were very reactive to those names. It became very clear. The interviewer asked, how did she react? And Kevin replied, she would thrash and hiss and wail and growl. It was like she was being hurt every time I said one of those names. The interviewer then asked, did you believe it? And Kevin said unequivocally, absolutely, absolutely I did. But it stayed like that for weeks and weeks. My blessings, my prayers, they did nothing. And then they wanted to just excuse me out of the room so they could just keep going. Ruby would start to go up and check on her at night. That's when the possessions, according to Jodi, were the worst. And then one day Ruby said, I'm just going to stay up there with her and stay with her. She needs a friend. maybe if I'm there with her, these things will leave her alone. So she started sleeping in the bed with Jodi. I still had men's group week after week after week, but it was different. Jodi started to call me out in men's groups. Now, not as the alpha, but very much as the zeta. It then shows some video clips of a Zoom meeting as Jodi is seemingly lecturing Kevin, telling him things like he doesn't understand where the deception is and where your lust is, and you're acting entitled. You, my dear, get to decide where you're going to stand for the rest of your life. Are you going to stand with truth, or are you going to stand in this ambiguous spot? We next hear again from the teacher and friend of Sherry's, Tressa Hammond. She was interviewed about her involvement with Connections along with her husband, and I didn't quite catch his name. But of this whole thing with Jodi, he, who was in the men's group, said, I remember being uncomfortable with how he being Kevin, how he was basically the bad guy in just about everything. Tressa said it got to the point where we were just listening and not participating. And Sherry had been coming over and borrowing books and things. And this one time she came over and I said, hey, we saw your parents on this class that we take. And she's like, I know. And she said, do you know that Jodi is living in my bedroom? And did you know that they're filming some of this stuff from my house and from my room? And I was like, that kind of bothered me so much that we kind of checked out. We next hear the interviewer saying to Chad, you mentioned the Christmas when Jodi moved in. I've got something to show you actually. He then hands Chad an iPad and it's a video of Jodi singing some kind of upbeat religious-y song. And the cringe is next level. It's so bad. And the camera pans over to Chad watching and listening. And he's grooving and bobbing his head. And he even looked at the camera and mouthed the word wow. And I'm fairly certain he's humoring Jodi and his mom and this whole entire ordeal because, I mean, I'm not a religious person, mostly due to my mom, my childhood, my personal trauma, and the Catholic Church. You know, the usual suspects. But this is just terrible, and I'm still kind of mad right now thinking about it and having to be subjected to that garbage while trying to watch this otherwise decent documentary. Everything about this woman, Jodi Hildebrandt, is uncomfortable. That is a really good word to describe her. Her presence just makes the entire room look and feel so uncomfortable, and you know, that might just be her whole shtick. Get everyone feeling so awkward that the only thing anyone wants to focus on is making it stop. And the only way to do that is to just kind of smile and nod and grin and bear it until Jodi makes it stop. Anyway, in the video, everyone is so relieved that they are done being assaulted by Jodi singing that they cheer and praise her so they can just move on. At least that's the vibe I'm getting. From there, it becomes pretty easy for Jodi to then use her manipulative tactics, religion, and guilt to divide and conquer her clients. And by divide and conquer, I mean she works on getting in the good graces of the women that have signed up for her class and use their husbands as the targets of her teachings or philosophies. She uses their shortcomings, their flaws, their mistakes, their religion, and their guilt. Jodi uses all of those things and weaponizes them in order to get the women in her group to believe that she has the power to solve all of their problems, especially if she can convince those women that the problem is men. And if she can get these women to turn on their husbands, then those women will become vulnerable and in turn will come to Jodi for guidance and support. She will underhandedly become the root of the problem while making everybody believe that she is the solution to the problem. Jodi is nothing more than a sleazy con woman. Chad was looking at that video on the iPad when he took it from the interviewer and he smiled. Not a happy, fond memories kind of smile, but more like of a yikes, what the fuck kind of smile. And he says, oh boy. And yeah, they were best friends. As he looked down at the iPad, his smile slowly faded. And he said, I remember it being a very fun Christmas. But that was also the Christmas that my 2 youngest siblings didn't get any gifts. Yep, you heard that right. His 2 youngest siblings, the 2 that ended up being severely abused in Jodi Hildebrandt's home, R and E, got absolutely no gifts, and if they did, they got tossed into the garbage. We then hear Ruby's voice right before we see the video she made of herself as she says, the 2 youngest are showing long patterns of selfishness. I was really hoping that keeping them home from school and wiping the floorboards would really bring pain, and it didn't. It wasn't painful for them because they're so numb, and we told them that this year they're not going to be visited by Santa. As we listen, we see comments come across the screen. Ruby is broken. She has no empathy. Everything is wrong with Ruby. I wish we could help them in some way. It's just so sad to watch. We then hear again from former neighbor Sydney Condi. Her name is a real tongue twister. As she says, my daughter's the same age as their youngest daughter, and she loves giving gifts to her friends. Ruby answered the door and my daughter said, Merry Christmas, can you give this gift? And she took it and she closed the door. My daughter happened to see their youngest later and she was so excited and she was like, did you get it? I picked that one just for you. And her face was just drawn and she was like, I didn't get it. My mom made me throw it away. They got to watch their siblings open presents and they didn't. I mean, that's stuff that's going to stay with you forever. It was heartbreaking. Sherry said, at this point I was in college, so when Christmas came, I went home. It was so tangible that something was off, and I can't describe it, but it was like a physical heaviness. I remember I ended up sleeping with my sisters because Jodi was still in my room. There was one time when I did go into my room to get something, and there were candles on the desk and massage oils, and it felt really dark. So at that moment, I kind of figured something was going on. And then the interviewer asked, were they lovers? And Sherry replied, I mean, I have my opinions, but... And then he asked, what's your opinion? And Sherry replied, I do think that they were. I'm going to talk about a post that I made on Facebook and Instagram about Kevin Franke at the end of this episode and share some of your comments about him and his role in this case. But one of the comments from Nate B brought up this topic here, how Sherry expressed her opinion that her mom and Jodi were engaged in an intimate relationship, which in this case is an issue for a couple of reasons that Nate mentioned in his comment. He said, one thing that needs to be included is the hypocrisy of both Ruby and Jodi for condemning the LGBTQ+ community repeatedly and publicly in their videos on Connections and before on 8 Passengers too, all the while they were engaged in a clandestine romantic relationship themselves. If you read what Sherry wrote in the book, she confirms that the 2 women were romantically and sexually involved. Also, what therapist needs to share a bedroom with their client on a daily basis? Give me a break. Sherry calls both her mom and Jodi out as hypocrites in this regard. At least Kevin Franke wasn't a cheater. There's a part of me that almost wants to defend Ruby here, dreamers, and I don't. And I won't and I don't, but there's always 2 sides and I'm divided on a lot of things in this case. It really doesn't pertain to the child abuse case, whether or not Jodi and Ruby had a fling. For me, it just adds another layer to an already salacious story, but it does seem, in a way, to serve more as a part of Jodi's overall manipulation of the women in her group that perhaps crossed a line. So much about Jodi's way of delivering her therapy or counseling services was unethical anyway, that it did not surprise me that the leader of a group built on a man-hating foundation would engage in an inappropriate relationship with a client or even a business partner, and not to mention a married client or business partner. It was wrong on different levels, regardless of it being homosexual. I mean, to most of us, it's wrong, but for members of the Mormon community, they have historically condemned homosexuality, but in recent years, the church has lightened its stance a little bit, even coming out in support of legislation that protects same-sex marriage laws. I looked this up, and in a November 2022 article on NBC.com, it says, the nearly 17 million member Utah-based faith said in a statement that church doctrine would continue to consider same-sex relationships to be against God's commandments, yet it said it would support rights for same-sex couples as long as they didn't infringe upon religious groups' rights to believe as they choose. We believe this approach is the way forward as we work together to preserve the principles and practices of religious freedom together with the rights of the LGBTQ+ individuals. Much can be accomplished to heal relationships and foster greater understanding, the church said in a statement posted on its website. Support for the Respect for Marriage Act under consideration in Congress is the church's latest step to stake out a more welcoming stance towards the LGBTQ+ community while holding firm to its belief that same-sex relationships are sinful. Still, its stance towards LGBTQ+ people, including those who grew up in the church, remains painful for many. The bottom line is the faith opposes same-sex marriage and sexual intimacy, but it has taken a more welcoming stance to the LGBTQ+ people in recent years. In 2016, it declared that same-sex attraction is not a sin, while maintaining acting on it was. So, even if Jodi and Ruby weren't openly condemning the LGBTQ+ community, regardless of this being a same-sex attraction, a same-sex intimate relationship, whatever, it was still an adulterous one, which is wrong no matter who's involved. It was wrong for Jodi to be this intimately involved with Ruby and really living in their home and running her website out of their house. It was weird. It's been reported that it really had a lot to do with COVID and the belief that this was the beginning of the end of the world and the second coming, that Jodi was possessed, and that Ruby and Kevin were the ones chosen by God to save her, or some other kind of theological nonsense such as that. To me, it's all a mixture of Jodi's ability to control and manipulate her clients, combined with Ruby and Kevin's already weakened marriage and family structure that created this sort of perfect storm. In the end, Jodi was the one motivated by greed and power. She saw the value in Ruby and the Franke family status as a prominent social media family, social media influencers, whatever you want to call it. And she just so happened to get involved at just the right time, as 8 Passengers was in desperate need of saving or a rebranding. Jodi saw that and exploited it for her own business purposes. Ruby was searching to regain her prominence in the online influencer community. Her brand was tanking, but she was holding tight, not to her family and not even to her channel, but to what was left of her own public image. And once she found Jodi, she latched onto her and made connections her new project, and her children became irrelevant when it came to her brand new endeavor. Ruby no longer needed them to be her little show monkeys, so she hid them away from the world in order to be able to move forward with Jodi and whatever the hell they all wanted to do together. It's like the same thing with Lori and Chad Daybell. They needed a bunch of people out of the way in order to move forward with whatever they wanted to do. Ruby wanted the same thing, and Jodi gave her the ways and means to make it happen. There are so many parallels between these religious zealots. They convince themselves that if people are in the way, or if they don't listen, or if they don't do what you demand of them, or if they're anything less than perfect, or they're inconvenient in any way, shape, or form, then they're considered dark. Their spirit is dark. The darkness is taking them over. Disobedience equates to evil, and the consequences, at least with the Frankes and the Daybells, was harsh. As for this being a situation of same-sex relations or same-sex attraction, I don't even think Ruby or even Jodi, for that matter, were even particularly gay or interested in the same sex necessarily. Maybe Jodi was going through a midlife crisis. Perhaps she rallied against homosexuality for so long that she just became numb or desensitized to it. Perhaps she used it more so against men and their men's groups. She labeled many of the men as being addicted to pornography, and that's one of the more prominent and really taboo issues amongst members of the LDS Church. And oftentimes there are frequently depictions of same-sex encounters in these explicit materials that they're watching. So when it came to Ruby, I think she may have become confused. Maybe even Jodi was confused or curious. Both of them had been in traditional marriages, both had children, and we know that Jodi hated men. And it just led to this confusion and this blurring of these lines between the women, combined with the isolation, being separated from their respective romantic partners, maybe some past trauma in their lives, or it just kind of happened. It's hard to say, but I do agree with Nate that it is very hypocritical and inappropriate for them to be intimate and really to be as close as they were. If Jodi was still acting as their counselor or therapist, then it becomes a professionalism issue and an ethics violation. So anyway, getting back to the documentary, there is then over a montage of pictures and videos of Jodi and Ruby together having just a blasty blast, right? Kevin said, "I don't know the extent to which their interactions went. It was much more than a friendship, much more than a sisterhood. It was uncomfortably intimate. She immediately started putting her fingers into every aspect of our lives. I think she wanted Ruby to herself, but in order to do that, she needed me out of the picture." And that's exactly what I was just saying. Jodi's just uncomfortable. We then hear from Brandon Patrick again as he says, Jodi would isolate people from their families, and for Jodi, separation was a means of control. It then shows some audio from one of Jodi's men's group's sessions where she is saying, "I want to talk about a topic, and the topic is separation. Separation is a principle of truth, and because it's a principle of truth, separation is a tool. It is necessary for growth and development, and this is really common for couples." Brandon Patrick then said, "At that time, I started to get some clients who were damaged by the therapy they were getting from Jodi, and I could see what was going on, and it made me sick. I thought it was evil. She was divorced at that point, and I don't know exactly what happened with her children, but I know that the relationships haven't been great. She was pretty isolated in terms of friends and family connections, and she was helping her clients become her in many ways, which, by the way, seems very cultish." The interviewer asked Brannon, "How does Jodi's practice fit with the definition of a cult?" Brannon replied, "I think a cult isolates. You can't question the leader. The leader has all the power. All of those things were happening in Jodi's practice." The documentary then quickly cuts to Chad with the interviewer asking him, "How did it come that you were kicked out?" Chad just kind of stared for a moment, thinking, and then it cuts away again. Dark music playing, says closed captions. The date, July 2022, comes onto the screen as Chad says, "I knew how much I loved Jodi at this point. I knew how much I respected her and loved her. I've always felt I had to confess to Jodi when it came to anything like pornography or making out with a girl. That to me weighed very heavy because that was something that was taught to me the most by her. Jodi thought it would be a good idea for me as a part of my repentance process to tell my mom. So I pretty much confessed to her that, while Jodi was in the home, I was viewing pornography. I was making out with girls at night behind your back. And I had never seen my mom more distraught, and I'd never seen her more red in the face, but it wasn't anger. It was a sadness. She was bawling. She couldn't breathe. And as she was crying, she kind of got surprised because it clicked. Oh my gosh, everything that happened to Jodi, all the possessions, the attacks, all the satanic attacks that were happening to Jodi, it was all because of you and what you were doing behind our back. She wiped away the tears and then she was back to serious and she said, Chad, it's time you leave the home. The interviewer asked, how old were you? Chad replied, I was 17 at this time. The interviewer asked, did it make any sense to you at the time moving out? Chad replied, yeah, I really thought I was messing with the house, messing with the spirit in the house, but I think that was my mom and Jodi's perfect chance to find something wrong with me and my dad at the same time to kick us out together. So, Kevin next says, when I came in the door, she was intense, and she just bluntly said, our marriage is in serious jeopardy because of you, Kevin, because of your selfishness and your lustful thoughts and behavior that you've been hiding. I'm trying to rise up to the measure that God wants me to be and to do the work that He wants for me to do, and you keep holding me and Jodi back. I want you to leave the house, and I want you to do it immediately. I don't want you to have any contact with me or the children. The interviewer asked Kevin, what did you say? And he replied, I said, okay. Okay. One by one, I had the kids come in and I sat them down and I told them, I'm going to go away for a time. I'm going to work on myself so that I can come back to the family and be the dad that you deserve. The interviewer asked, how did they react? Kevin replied, emotionally. One of the children, the look in her eyes, it was a pleading. What was Ruby doing at the time? Watching. I remember as I was holding my youngest and just holding her, she was crying. Ruby was photographing it on her phone, and she had this smirk or this smile on her face that she just, I don't know what she was thinking, but it looked like this look of, oh, this is such good content. I wish there was a way to go back in time and stop that madness and to just stop it. We then come back to Sherry's interview and she says, I got a call from Kevin. Your mother has invited me to leave the house and I'm going to ask that you don't talk to me or Chad. At that point, I was like, this is absolutely crazy. And I think I responded and said, I'm confused and I wish you the best. But I was worried about the kids now that are at the home. And I got a long text from Ruby. It was full of things like, you've shown me that you don't want to be a part of this family and you're causing chaos for everyone and you're reaching out to your dad when we asked you not to. You're crossing a line. And so after that is when I got a phone call that basically said, you've been removed from the car insurance. You need to get your own. I got a call that said, at the end of the year, your health insurance is going to be terminated. I didn't know exactly what was going on. So I got in the car and drove down. And I remember feeling really nervous to go over. And so I asked Tressa to come with me. We then cut back to Tressa and her husband with the interviewer asking them, so what happened? Tressa said, when we drove up to the house, sure enough, Ruby opens the door and steps out onto the porch. Sherry then said something like, Sherry, you're causing a lot of damage to the family and you've shown that you don't want to be a part of our family and you're deceived and I feel sorry for you and you're in my prayers. Tressa said, Sherry had tears and she was shaking. I had tears streaming down my face. And the only person that had no emotion was Ruby. She was just stone cold, zero emotion, only anger and animosity and defense. And I did not know how a mom who gave birth to someone could just sit there like that and listen to their daughter weep and beg It was horrible. I just wanted to get Sherry out of there after that. Sherry then said it was understood that I wasn't to come to the home anymore or talk to the kids, that I wasn't like part of the family. Tressa said Sherry just melted, just fell apart. She was just still shaking, and she was looking through her phone, looking, and she said, "This is my mom." She showed me a picture of who she knew her mom to be, and she said, "That's not my mom." And it seems that Ruby had literally come to see evil in everyone around her. And now the only people left in that house are those 4 young children. And from there, part 2 of this docuseries came to an end. So when it comes to Kevin in our discussion, I really wasn't sure how to feel about him just accepting the demand for him to leave the home. He caved in way too easy, at least that's my opinion. But at the same time, I don't think he could have anticipated or foreseen what ended up happening to his youngest children actually happening. But it still all goes back to his decision to not protest or challenge what his wife asked him to do. I appreciate the fact that he respected her wishes on a basic level, but I don't know, I'm torn. I've been torn for a while, so I asked on social media for some opinions so I can get some different perspectives out there. How much of what ended up happening to the Franke children is Kevin responsible for, if at all? From the Facebook group, listener Jade Marie commented 100%. He even admits in the documentary that he didn't like the way she treated the kids, yet did nothing to stop her. He knew what she was like, and he walked away from his children. He completely failed to safeguard them. I can agree with that, but it seems like he was made to feel like he was the reason why evil things were happening. It was him and Chad, and that was upsetting the spirituality in the home and within the family. And maybe he just felt so guilty and figured he was more of a problem in the home than Ruby was. Tiffany G commented that Kevin abandoned those kids. He had a legal right to his children, yet he abdicated that right for her to do whatever she wanted. He was weak in all things and should be prosecuted, in my opinion. So for me, dreamers, whether or not Kevin deserved to be prosecuted might be something that can be debated until the end of time. But I don't know if there was anything that he did that crossed a line into criminality. He's certainly not the first dad to walk away from his family for whatever reason. But as far as the family court is concerned, as long as he was keeping up with providing for his children, I guess there is nothing out there that says that he can't legally choose to not exercise his parenting time. Being only a provider isn't unusual either. Stepping up and being there and being present, I guess, is optional. Kevin does have the right to walk away from his kids if he wants to, as long as he's paying his child support. That's all he's really legally obligated to do, it seems. Phyllis T commented short and sweet, he was a complete wuss. Yeah, I was married to one of those, and yes, it is absolutely not fun having a husband that is useless and weak-minded. Dave W. provided the much-needed perspective from the dad's point of view as he commented, "As a father who divorced his wife and moved when the kids were still young, I fought hard to get equal parenting time with my kids and would not have settled for a second less than 50% or more of their time. This cat just walked away from the family after his wife asked him to. He ignored her, as requested, but he also walked away from his kids. He's absolutely culpable in this. What kind of father does that? Had that been me, she would have had the fight of her life on her hands. This guy deserves at least some jail time for negligence, in my opinion." Nellie B commented, "I do think he holds some responsibility of what happened to those kids, but everyone needs to listen to others who were coercively controlled by Jodi Hildebrandt. I think his upbringing in the church, his worship of Ruby, and the income that they were getting from the YouTube channel played a role. I think Ruby recognized how much control she could have over him when they first started dating. She recognized his insecurities and used them against him. I do feel that he is a victim. And you know, Nellie, and everyone else. That's where I feel divided, because I do understand, and I very much believe that someone like Jodi can be very manipulative. And she preyed on these people's fear of religion and everything that goes along with that. But also, she was able to prey on Kevin's overwhelming love and devotion to Ruby. And that was what Kevin made his priority. There is that crazy kind of love out there where men and women put relationships ahead of their children. Kevin certainly isn't the first, but that being said, even if I did find myself in that type of situation, I know that I would not allow anyone to forbid me from seeing my kids. And if the backlash was really that bad to the point where Kevin would just bow out and obey his wife and not have any communication with kids at all, I would have taken, if I were him, I would have taken this to the family court system. If Kevin exercised his parental rights and enlisted the power of the court to make that happen, it's likely that none of this would have been happening. And at the very least, it could have possibly been exposed much sooner. And I say possibly because even Sherry tried to raise the alarm, but nobody listened. Veronica M. commented straight to the point, "Idiot." Kind of reminds me of thoughts I had about my ex-husband. And I'm sorry if I'm turning this into an ex-husband bashing. We had some interaction last week in court, so he's kind of fresh on the mind. While I appreciate Kevin's role in the family as the provider, being highly educated in a very demanding and prestigious career, there is something about him, even all that being said about what he's accomplished in his life, there is something about Kevin that's missing. And I clearly remember feeling the same exact way about my husband as our marriage was in the throes of crashing and burning. I felt like I had so much passion and fire and drive to do what I could to figure out a way to find the right places to be and the right ways to feel towards him and our relationship. And looking back on it, I remember one night in particular, just a couple of months before we split and moved to Nevada, I was standing in the doorway of our bedroom, and while he sat there looking pathetic and dejected with his head hung, I was crying, and I said, "Say something, say anything, have some feelings, express some emotions, discover some passion, dig deep for anything at all that can show you're not completely dead inside." And all my ex-husband had to say was, "I don't know what to say." It's very much reminiscent of like how Kevin is, his whole demeanor and his disposition. When I see him speaking so slowly, with very little beyond just the words coming out of his mouth, without any kind of energy, very little emotion. Well, he did get a little bit emotional in the documentary when he talked about speaking to his kids one at a time when he was leaving the family home. But beyond that, his affect was very flat, and he just seems tired and done. We still have part 3 to get to, but yeah. I was with my ex-husband for so long that I thought this stoic, unemotional affect was just the way that he was. That instead of wanting more, I decided to match that energy, that complacency, that indifference, that apathy, instead of looking for more. I just accepted it until he barely had the energy or the motivation to be anything beyond pitifully useless. Idiot, as Veronica M. so eloquently put it. Some husbands out there are just flippin' idiots. And wives too. I'm not here to bash men. There are plenty of wives or girlfriends or whatever that are idiots too. Cynthia D said, "I would not walk away from my pets, let alone my children. He's culpable for sure." And that is a good point. We often catch ourselves inadvertently finding ourselves overwhelmingly emotional over the way animals are treated in some of these true crime stories. If there was a dog involved in the case, we usually want to know if the dog's okay. And when we find out the dog is okay, we're relieved and we can continue on with the case. We just know that dogs' lives depend on us. And they're loyal. They're so loyal. And they're sentient beings. And they have feelings. They feel emotions. So as the sentient, empathetic beings that we are, ourselves as humans, we can't help it. But then it can kind of be a bad look if anyone appears to care more or express more feelings over the life or treatment of the family dog than the actual family. And it's not that we truly think that the life of an animal is more important than that of the life of a human being, but I think it's just kind of an auto response that we sometimes have. I do it. When there's a dog involved in a case, I want to know where it ended up. And oftentimes we find out in the end where the dog wound up. Someone related to the case usually adopts the dog orphaned by murder or someone being sent to jail. I had recently been watching some trial footage from the Shonda Vander Ark trial. Have you guys heard of that one? Shonda Vander Ark. It's another child abuse case that unfolded a couple of years ago out of Norton Shores, Michigan. That's located along the western coast of the Lower Peninsula, about 40 miles west of Grand Rapids. Her 15-year-old son, Timothy Ferguson, died on July 6, 2022, after being sent by his father to live with his mother and a spattering of his siblings, half-siblings. This Vander Ark woman had 5 kids in all, 4 boys and a girl, but none of them lived with her on a consistent basis, with the exception of the youngest boy that she had with her current husband, who at the time that this all happened was not in the house after having suffered a debilitating stroke and was being cared for by his parents in their home. Shonda and the oldest of her children, a son named Paul, together were then free to abuse Timothy, who has special needs and was on the autism spectrum. And they abused him until his body, weighing only 69 pounds or 31.3 kilograms, when he died, he couldn't take the abuse any longer. And he succumbed to starvation and hypothermia. Yeah, hypothermia in July. It can happen, apparently, if you use a 12-hour-long ice bath as a form of punishment. I watched some of Shonda Vander Ark's trial testimony, and she had the cameras trained on her son. This woman is awful. She had cameras trained on her son around his room, but specifically, she had one particularly troubling camera placed kind of low to the ground in a closet where Timothy was kept most of the time. There was a tarp on the ground to prevent his urine and feces from soiling the carpet, but it was largely ineffective and the room was just soiled and disgusting. Well, when Timothy died and Shonda needed to call 911, she quickly worked on staging the scene to make it appear Timothy wasn't being restrained and kept prisoner in a closet, and part of that was hiding evidence and getting rid of some of the cameras. Of course, there was nothing normal about the scene, and first responders were suspicious from the start. Not just because the teenager was dead, but it was obvious that he was extremely skinny, so they knew. Shonda had a story at the ready about him being on a hunger strike for 2 weeks. So anyways, the cameras that they had their SD cards in, she had taken them out, with the exception of one of them. And it was the one that was in the closet. We don't know if it was inadvertent or if she wanted to keep it in there to look back on, for, to reminisce, maybe. I don't know. So they were able to actually play some of that footage for the jury. And at one point in the video, we see the family dog come into the closet. And there came a time during the trial that the prosecutor asked if Shonda would punish the dog by giving it an ice bath. And she replied that she wouldn't think to do that to the dog. And the prosecutor challenged her on that. It's probably one of the best cross-examinations that I've watched in recent times. It was good. He really took her to task for what she did. And he challenged her about, I wouldn't do that to her. You wouldn't think to do that to the dog. And, she finds it okay. He asked her, she find it okay to punish children with an ice bath, but not the dog. He also asked her about the same thing regarding hot sauce that she not only used as a punishment, but also as a condiment for the minimal amounts of food that she would give to her 15-year-old son, her 15-year-old starving son. This woman didn't just go and get hot sauce from the store. She specifically ordered pretty much the hottest hot sauce that she could find, which was a brand called Elijah's Extreme Regret, and it's made using 2 of the hottest peppers in the world, the Carolina Reaper and the Trinidad Scorpion, both peppers being over 1 million on the Scoville scale, or maybe 2 million, I can't remember, which is the scientific way. Either way, it's still excessive. Let me go ahead and verify that. Hold on. Okay, so according to Google or AI or whoever is answering my questions, the Carolina Reaper is the world's hottest pepper with an average Scoville heat units SHU rating of 1.6 million and some individual peppers recorded at over 2.2 million. So it is extremely hot because the jalapeno pepper is around the mildest jalapeno is about 5,000 on the Scoville scale, 5,000 to like, I think it was 20,000, something like that. But I don't even eat jalapenos. I am not a spicy food person. So yeah, this Elijah's Extreme Regret is on Amazon. It's over 1 million on the scale. And yeah, I have a low tolerance for heat and spice. Looking at the Scoville chart, I'm comfortable around the poblano pepper. Literally, I'm serious, I do not do spicy foods. But anyway, what Shonda Van Der Ark would do is during the rare times that she would allow Timothy to have food, it was usually bread soaked in Extreme Regret hot sauce. And if he ate 2 slices and finished them, then he could have 2 slices of bread without. If he had 4 slices soaked in hot sauce, then he could have 4 slices without. Shonda was asked on the stand if she would punish the dog with hot sauce, and she said no. And if I remember correctly, she answered that as if the idea of punishing a dog with hot sauce was ridiculous. The attorney also pointed out at one point that the dog looked healthy in that video clip that they saw from the camera that had the SD card in it. All the other kids were generally okay. I mean, we would have been outraged if we had found out the dog had been starved or given ice baths, right? But even this woman, as depraved and as cruel as she was to her son, would never think of treating a dog that way. And it seems ridiculous when you say it out loud, but I can imagine the outrage if the dog was neglected too. I mean, that's what Cynthia D meant with her answer. We wouldn't even do it to our dogs, much less our children. But even child abusers and child killers will draw the line at animal cruelty. So getting back to the comments on Facebook from the listeners, Santos S. said, Kevin is a victim of Ruby and Jodi's cultish indoctrination and sheer manipulation. Having already been susceptible due to his LDS background, he didn't stand a chance against Ruby and Jodi teaming up against him. Anything that appeared suspicious was easily explained away using first religion, i.e. Jodi being exorcised through Kevin's prayers, love, i.e. Ruby's feminine wiles, and loyalty, i.e. Kevin's love of God, wife, and family. Homeboy did not stand a chance, and neither did Chad. Okay, so dreamers, this whole religion, I mean, this isn't the first time we've seen stuff like this happen with these extremists, these offshoots, these subsets. They've applied their own interpretation of the scriptures. They strive for perfection, but they do it through weakness, intimidation, and fear. Their very own religion is weaponized and used against them, and for what? To what end? I always wonder about these abuse cases when there is an array of children involved, like the Hart family or the Turpins, or the Wessons. Remember them up there in Fresno? I think Marcus Wesson, they called him the Vampire King of Fresno. I wonder what their end game was going to be. How long did they think that they were going to be able to sustain this abuse? Especially like a case like the Turpins or here with the Frankies. How is all of this going to turn out for them? They've got this whole litter of kids and they're just getting older and older with each passing day. How was all of that supposed to wrap up? So the Turpins and the Frankies could finally retire? They start keeping their kids captive, and then all of a sudden they're adults and they've come to realize, despite the abuse and the isolation, that this is not what life was meant to be like. They have glimpses of the outside world. They eventually learn what they're experiencing is not normal, and then they're stuck. But they're stuck with nothing but time on their hands to try and figure out a way out. In fact, there has been a story in the news in recent days about a man who had been held captive by his stepmom for like 2 decades. One of our listeners posted about it in the Facebook discussion group. So I got this information from the Associated Press in an article dated from about a week ago, maybe now 2 weeks ago. It says, a man rescued from a burning home in Connecticut told a shocking story of cruelty and constant hunger as he was held captive in a single room for 20 years by his father and stepmother, according to a newly released arrest warrant. The man told authorities his confinement began when he was about 11 years old. He said he was locked in a room without heat or air conditioning nearly all day and night and given limited food and water. With no access to a bathroom, he devised ways to dispose of his waste, including using a series of straws that led to a hole in a window. Pieces of his teeth would break off when he did not eat because of a lack of dental care. He saved some of his daily ration of 2 small bottles of water to bathe without soap and to cut his own hair. The years of cruelty ended February 17th when he set fire to the house in Waterbury in a deliberate effort to save himself and told his story to responding officers and firefighters, according to the arrest warrant, charging his stepmother with kidnapping, cruelty to person, and other crimes. Police are now trying to determine how this could have happened without anyone noticing and whether any warning signs were missed. Investigators want to look at records from city schools and state welfare agencies, Waterbury Police Chief Fernando Sagnolo said at a news conference Thursday. The man, now 32, is identified as male victim 1 in police records. The stepmother, Kimberly Sullivan, 56, posted $300,000 bail on Thursday and was released from custody after appearing in Waterbury Superior Court, said her lawyer. I'm sorry if I butcher his name, but it looks like it's Ioannis Kaloidis. Sounds kind of Greek to me, maybe. He said Sullivan, who was arrested on Wednesday, denies any wrongdoing. Her next court date is March 26th, so it's coming up this week. And you know what? I think that it's awfully nice that she got to be granted bail when she was being held against her will, but not her stepson, right? Too nice, if you ask me. I would encourage people to not rush to judgment, Kaloidis said in a phone interview. This woman is presumed innocent. The article continued. The man's father died last year while his biological mother has not been a part of his life, authorities said. He and Sullivan lived in the home that he set on fire. Medical personnel said the man was near starvation and had a wasting syndrome, a condition of weight loss and muscle deterioration. When he got to a hospital, the warrant said. At 5 foot 9 inches tall, or 1.75 meters, he weighed only 69 pounds or 31 kilograms. And dreamers, you notice that he was found weighing the exact same as Timothy Ferguson, the 15-year-old who was starved and frozen to death by his mother in Michigan that I just mentioned a few moments ago. He too only weighed 69 pounds. Timothy, he had been held captive for about a year, I think maybe a little bit longer. And this man in Connecticut, he was held for 20 years, and while it did not mention anything about physical abuse, at least it hasn't been mentioned yet, he was starved down to the same weight that Timothy was. And I wondered if that's like the absolute bare minimum an average-sized human being can weigh when that human has been completely wasted away by starvation. Though the oldest of the Turpin kids, you remember those kids out of Paris, California? Yeah, their oldest was 29 when she and her 12 siblings were rescued from their house of horrors in 2018. She weighed only 82 pounds or 37.2 kilograms. So yeah, not too far off from each other, but way off from what these people were supposed to be weighing. But anyway, the article continued. The man was treated for smoke inhalation and diagnosed with PTSD and depression. Spagnolo said that the man faces a long road of physical and mental treatment. He said police are supporting him, including taking up a collection and buying him clothes and other items. The man told police that he was constantly hungry. When he was in school, he would ask classmates for food, steal food, or eat out of the garbage. In later years, when he was out of school and confined to the house, he would get 2 sandwiches a day and some water while locked in his room. The police's only interaction with the family were in 2005, the chief said. One was a welfare check after children who attended school with him before he was pulled out expressed concern about him. The second and final time was after the family made a harassment complaint against school officials for reporting them to state child welfare officials. Officers who went to the home said they spoke to the man, then a child, and said that there was no cause for concern. Officials with the State Department of Children and Families, which investigates child abuse, said Thursday that they have not found any records of agency involvement with the family, but were continuing to look. They added that reports of negligence or abuse deemed unsubstantiated are erased 5 years after the investigations are complete. We are shocked and saddened for the victim and the unspeakable conditions that he endured, the department said in a statement. The now adult victim has shown incredible strength and resilience during this time of healing, and our hearts go out to him. When the man attended a Waterbury elementary school as a child, staff saw that he was extremely small and thin and made multiple calls to the stepmother and to DCF. Spagnolo said police did not have that information when they responded to the man's house in 2005. So, it sounds like DCF and the police department over there in Waterbury dropped the ball big time on this one. This visit from police happened in 2005. And you know I covered a few cases out of the state of Connecticut back in 2023 going into 2024. I covered the Cheshire murders and the Sandy Hook shooting. And I also did a Patreon episode on the 2004 disappearance of Billy Smolinski, which happened in Waterbury. That was another case that kind of had me poo-pooing on the Waterbury police. In that case, when Billy's family reported him missing after he failed to return home from what he said was going to be a trip up north to go look at a car for sale and asking his neighbor to feed the dog while he was gone, that neighbor called his family to let them know, hey, I'm supposed to feed Billy's dog, but he's gone and he did not leave me a key. I can't access the dog. When that call came in, his family and girlfriend grew concerned almost right away. So when Billy failed to show up for work that night or the following day, his family tried to report him missing, but because he had told the neighbor he was going to be gone for a few days, they were told that they had to wait 72 hours before they could make their report, and with that time was lost. The police didn't take the disappearance of an adult man as seriously as they would have, or should have, or could have, especially since someone told him he was going to be gone. This was a case that was also featured on Investigation Discovery's Disappeared, and if you've listened to me for a long time, you know that that's one of my favorite shows. The police also arrested Billy's mom for going on private property to put up a missing person poster. Yeah, they actually did that, and I mean, that was pretty messed up of the Waterbury Police Department. But yeah, anyway, this poor young man was stuck in that Waterbury, Connecticut house for 20 years, starved and with deteriorated muscles. The state of Connecticut's probably going to have to take care of this man's needs for quite some time to come. And I do have one question. Does anybody know anything about this man's biological mom yet? Does anyone know anything or seen anything on Reddit about her? Has she come forward? I haven't really looked, and I'm getting sidetracked again. I'm going to go ahead and take a break. I'll come back in the morning to finish this. Okay, so it's the next morning now. It turns out that the bite that's on my arm that Fred did the other day, or 2 days ago when I got his nails cut, it is infected. So after I'm done recording this, I got to go pick up my prescription for the antibiotics and the cream to put on it. Yeah, it's not great. He really punctured my skin pretty bad. But it's okay. I'm not mad at him. We were cutting his nails and he didn't like it, but you have to do what you have to do, and it's one of the hazards of having some sort of variation of a pug. So getting back to some of your opinions on Kevin Franke, Amy, with 2 E's and a bunch of last names, said, I think people who are super suggestive are very easily manipulated into doing things that they probably wouldn't do without being led to it. They both came from a religion that has cultish aspects to it to begin with. Jodi capitalized on their ability to be led and manipulated them into insane behavior. I'm not saying it justifies anyone's behavior, but think about someone like Charles Manson. He never actually killed anyone himself, yet he manipulated others into doing his bidding. Ruby already had the propensity for cruelty hardwired, in my opinion, and Jodi just capitalized on that and brought out the absolute worst evil in her. Her husband, while still responsible for his own actions, I do believe was doing the right thing as prescribed by Jodi. Look at cults and people who have been in them, and that's what you have here. In my opinion, the absolute worst person in this hierarchy of assholes is Jodi. She should get the death penalty for what she did to those kids. Ruby belongs in prison for life, and I have little, if no, compassion for her. I think living with what he allowed to happen is going to follow Kevin for the rest of his life. I don't believe he's criminally responsible. I do believe he is a weak person who is easily manipulated, and he needs to get some serious help to figure out why he got to where he did. Yeah, that was one of the longer comments, and clearly Amy is not as divided as I have been about Kevin. But I do agree that there isn't anything criminal that he did per se, but aside from all the culty aspects of these people's behavior, there is very little that can be said to make any sort of excuse to have zero contact with all 6 of his children, just because the 2 of them told him so. Especially with his 2 adult kids, or at least Chad was nearly an adult. He was 17. He was basically there. Sherry was already in college, and if they wanted to have contact with him, it would be completely up to them, and Kevin should have at least maintained his relationship with them as long as they were willing. But obviously, he didn't see things that way. And it's not just the 2 adult kids, it's all of them, really. He could have told Ruby and Jodi that if Sherry and Chad wanted to text him or to see him, it's up to them and them alone, and he should have refused to go along and then went straight down to the court to file for legal separation and custody arrangements, and at least tried to trust the system and to trust the process instead of trusting those 2 crazy nutbags. But he didn't, and that is really a hard place to be if he's hoping his children will someday forgive him. At least the saving grace of it all is that Sherry and Chad seem to be pretty well adjusted. I'm sure that there is trauma that needs to be confronted and worked through, but good for them coming out the other end of this in decent shape, all things considered, despite their parents and Jodi. And I'm sure that they would attribute their blessings to their strong faith in God, and that might very well be an example of what the basis of their faith is supposed to look like, and I can appreciate that for what it is. So our next comment comes from Casey, and Casey said that all of them, all 6 of the Franke kids plus Kevin, were victims of Ruby and Jodi's mental illness. But that being said, Kevin is 100% responsible for neglecting those children. And I agree. It will never be okay with any parent to simply walk away from a kid. And, to give you a little bit about what's going on in my own personal life, I'm kind of going through a situation where the biological mother walked away from the 5-year-old that she has with my boyfriend. That's kind of a bit of drama going on and kind of in the background of my life, but I'm kind of staying on the sidelines with my popcorn as much as I can. But because we are going on almost a year together, it doesn't seem unusual to me anymore for a mom to turn her back on her child the way that this woman that my boyfriend is dealing with has. But I get reminded that it is less common for mom to be the absentee deadbeat, yet here we are. This child has only seen his mom 3 times since the beginning of 2025 and hasn't seen him since February 23rd when we dropped him off to her, but Then she turned around and called the dad to come back and pick him up a few hours later because the child had a cough and she didn't want to get sick. And after that, she sent a text message after we picked him up saying that she wouldn't be able to see her son for the foreseeable future. But yeah, his dad really doesn't have to explain anything to him because he's kind of used to the way his mom is now. But I'm sorry, as a parent, there is no excuse to just give up on your kid by sending basically a breakup text to your own child. Sorry, I know I'm your biological mother and I brought you into this world, but it's just not working out. It's not you, it's me. Peace out. Yeah, real cool to do that to your kid, but whatever. For me, it's less drama to have to deal with. And the truth is, in the past, this biological mother that I'm speaking about in my personal life used to manipulate the dad by weaponizing their son against him. And we've seen this a lot. If you've watched the court shows, divorce court, paternity court, and all that stuff, there's always a lot of manipulation going on between couples, and often the kid gets stuck in the middle. But she used to threaten the dad, not by keeping their son from him, but the exact opposite. She used to threaten to dump their son on my boyfriend and run away and make dad take care of him on his own by himself without her help, which he was afraid of because he really wasn't equipped or prepared to take care of a kid on his own until he met me. And it's what I made a career out of, childcare. Having a kid around doesn't bother me whatsoever. I'd rather have him around than the mom, to be honest. But that's another story for another day. Like a lot of things I say, a lot of what I say can be left unsaid or on another day, but I tend to put it all in one episode and have you stuck here with me for 2+ hours, right? But yeah, eventually I was just like, if she doesn't want him, she doesn't want him. And he called her out on her bluff, and she did just what she said she was going to do. She basically ghosted her son and spent most of last year living her best Casey Anthony lifestyle, right? But when we enrolled him in kindergarten in the fall last year, that's when the mom realized she had done fucked up and the dad was stepping up to be the full-time parent. She started causing problems for us and sending police to my house for welfare checks and making abuse accusations. All the usual crazy baby mama bullshit, but she ended up getting pregnant and having another kid that she can't take care of, and I think it's all but given up. And the only reason I feel comfortable about talking about this on my show is because we are not at all social media connected. None of us are. They're not connected. We aren't connected. There's no idea of what this podcast is called and what I do, so I'm good. But yes, in case you're wondering, he has filed for full custody and child support. Court is next month, and he's handling it the right way. And, there's a lot to be said. Props to all the single dads out there that are making it happen. It's not easy to do, and I think sometimes it gets forgotten that there are some dads out there that do step up and they handle it. But now that I'm having this experience in my personal life, it doesn't seem as unusual to me as it used to. But anyway, getting back to it, another listener named Layla, hi Layla, said that Kevin is not responsible for Ruby and Jodi's actions. He did stay away from the children and the marriage at Ruby's demand. It seemed that he believed staying away would ensure that he would be let back into the family. I think that understanding the dynamics of narcissistic/cult abuse is necessary to have good insight into Kevin's choices. It's a nuanced situation. Ultimately, he abdicated his parental role, and his children suffered by having no one there to protect them. And yes, I agree. Sometimes I think you do have to put aside all this mess about being possessed or turning into a dark being or a zombie, and instead to just focus on what's going on with a clear mind. The guy is obviously really smart, Kevin is, but he let these intangibles dictate what he did and didn't do in real life. And I just can't get on board with that. Unless Kevin was a direct threat to his children, which he appears to be nothing of the sort, then there is nothing on earth or in heaven or hell that should have kept him from exercising his rights as their father. Kevin seems to have a lot of guilt that he has to live with and a lot of amends to make, but I don't even know if he's even really seeing that at this point. It is possible that what ended up happening to R and E would not have happened to the extent to which it did, but we do know that Kevin was comfortable with Ruby's parenting style long before Jodi ever came along, and we know that Ruby was physically, emotionally, and psychologically abusive, which Kevin was aware of and seemed resigned to just allowing Ruby to run the home as she saw fit, since he was gone most of the time at work. And there was lots of unseen footage of him witnessing Ruby's behavior and still doing nothing to step in or stand up for his kid. Listener Michelle Ann said that she can understand sometimes that one parent can be manipulated into thinking it's best for the kids if they kept their distance, but that's classic isolation behavior of an abuser. But did he bother to go see the videos that Ruby was posting? It would take only one visit to their page, and he's talking about Jodi and Ruby's Connections Classroom, Moms of Truth page, for him to see that something wasn't right. Either he was so indifferent to these kids that he was never even curious enough to take a peek, or he saw what was happening and didn't see it as a problem. You know, even if Kevin did go to their page and look at their videos, he could have been interpreting things in whichever way Jodi told him to, or he just justified what he would see and hear in his own mind. You know, this guy, I think we've all reached an agreement that he was pretty obsessed with Ruby and his relationship and his marriage. And I would probably think that if he wasn't around his wife, that he would be checking up on her on social media. But I don't know. Maybe he was just really trying to respect his wife's wishes. I have no idea. I can't imagine that he would have ever thought what did end up happening would ever happen, but still. I even have cameras to check on my dogs. I talk to them and give them treats through this camera whenever I'm not home, and that's just my dogs. I would have never been okay with anyone telling me to have no contact with my kid just because they said so. So Linda B said that she finds Mormons to be gullible and that Kevin had been beaten down with all of the false narratives of porn addictions or whatever that crazy woman convinced so many of the men that were under her quote-unquote care of. That being said, Kevin does bear some of the blame of not checking up on his kids. Nate B said that he thinks Jodi and Ruby iced Kevin out of the kids' lives and that he just went along with Ruby having the YouTube channel to keep her happy. He didn't stand up to her in regards to how she treated the children. And while I do agree that he went along with the YouTube channel to keep Ruby happy, that happened at first. All the kids were happy about it at first. But once the money started rolling in by the tens of thousands of dollars each month, Kevin was just as much on board with it as Ruby was, in my opinion. And he made that quite clear in the documentary if you watched it. Once the checks hit the bank, Kevin was like, I'm in. He was all about 8 passengers too, as much as Ruby, if not more so. Calf M said, it's hard to say, and I agree, it's really hard. I'm really wishy-washy on some of these more controversial opinions on how we feel about some people involved in these cases we talk about. He was also likely a victim of emotional abuse, and it's an easier dynamic to understand if you reverse the genders because that's more common. Agreed, and I talked about the whole gender reversal thing in my own personal life, how the optics of it are a little bit different. Calf M said, a wife who stays with an abusive husband who is abusing both her and their children, but then again, she said, he didn't stay. The fact that he was able to see clearly enough to get himself out of the situation, but didn't fight to get them out, makes me see him as being more culpable. And you know, yes, Kevin did leave, and that comment that Calf made makes sense. He saved himself, but not his kids, and that's a cowardly move. But I don't think he would have left if it was up to him. I do think he would have stayed in this abusive relationship. It seems almost somewhat codependent as well. But yeah, I think he would have stayed in the abusive relationship out of fear that he would be ill-equipped and unprepared to care for 6 children without Ruby's help, even if it was a 50-50 custody agreement. It's like I mentioned with my boyfriend's kid. He had the same fear, and they only had one, and he still wasn't prepared and did not have the confidence in himself that he could do this on his own. And I understand that, especially when he's the only one working and providing. But getting back to Kevin, I really do think that if we want to categorize him as a victim of emotional and psychological abuse, that he would have stayed, the same as how so many women who are being abused also stay. But he left out of fear. I'd even say that it was a spineless thing for him to have done. And I do hope he finds a way to make it up to all of his children, because if nothing else, every one of them deserves to be happy. What that looks like, I guess, remains to be seen. Teresa S. said that she just doesn't understand how he can not only turn his back on the younger children, but the 2 older children as well. The son who was kicked out the same time as the dad, and the oldest daughter that was in college, and the son wasn't even 18 yet. But since the mother forbade the dad from taking them, wouldn't a parent, a decent, good, caring parent, tell the other parent to F off and at least attempt to check on his son? It's weird to me. And yeah, it's weird to me too. The ones under 18, Kevin still had every right and all of the means in the world to fight for them if he wanted to. But there really is no reason or excuse to not speak to any of the kids if they wanted to speak to him once they were 18. And even the family courts will take what teenagers have to say into consideration, even the ones who were 10, 12, 14, and 16. They would have somewhat of a voice. They could have been heard only if Kevin exercised his parental rights and frickin' listened. But then again, as we're sitting here thinking and talking about it in hindsight, what if Kevin did move forward with the family courts and filed for custody or visitations? And what if the kids were well on their way to being abused and starved by Ruby and Jodi? I don't even want to think about what their reactions would have been if Kevin would have had them served by the family court. What lengths would the 2 of them have gone to in order to keep the children hidden? How far would they have gone in order to keep their secret? I mean, just look at everything Lori and Chad Daybell did in order to get what they wanted. They were motivated only by greed and lust, and they tried to hide behind this veil of their own made-up religion. Anyway, Rachel D. said that a parent is always responsible for checking in with their children. He didn't interact with them for a year, I believe. He was a negligent parent. He didn't do the abuse, but he never stopped it either. He's not an innocent bystander. He should have been a parent and involved with his children's lives. Listener Crystal S., she's the only one who commented that said that they followed the Franke prior to the discovery of the child abuse that was going on. She said that she kept an eye on this family for years, well before they ever met Jodi. And yes, they were making negative headlines prior to Jodi, or due to events that occurred prior to Jodi's involvement. Crystal continued, they abused and starved those kids back then too, and he was doing it right along with Ruby, Kevin was. It makes me sick how he's now trying to claim innocence. He should be held responsible, and it's a shame he won't ever get to be held responsible for his actions. They deleted all their videos, but you can find people posting videos about how bad they were on YouTube still, dated before Jodi ever came into their lives. You can see what he did and what he was fine with Ruby doing. And this next part that Crystal wrote in her comment was news to me. She said that's why he got mad that his oldest daughter took an iPad with proof of the abuse when the younger kids were rescued and wanted her arrested. I was like, what? I gotta look that up and expand on that. And I'll do that right after this comment. For those of us that hadn't heard that information, I didn't hear it. Maybe it's in the third part, and maybe I wasn't paying attention. But this is the first I'd heard it when I read Crystal's comment. That body cam was insane, watching him try to get the cops to go after his own daughter who was protecting her siblings. He only wanted to get Ruby out of trouble, his kids be damned. Also, he's only divorcing Ruby so he can get his kids back for optics. He's absolutely going to be with her after she's out. And Melanie W. followed up with her comment, he is a spineless turd. and I just called him spineless a few minutes ago as well. I agree. But now, let's get back to this nonsense about Kevin trying to have Sherry arrested for taking an iPad out of the house. What the heck? I just looked it up on YouTube. Why don't we all take a listen to Kevin in all his stupid, spineless turd glory?
There you go. Is it all there?
Yes. Yeah, explain to me again why this was not robbery.
Because it's a civil issue. It's you guys are family. She's been in the house before. You haven't been in the house in a year. She had interest in the items. She didn't take them with the intention to deprive you of them. So theft, that's the theft code. We have to prove intent to deprive you of the items. And that wasn't her intent in having them. So the detective sergeant said that we're not going to charge her for anything.
Okay. I'll have to do some more research on that.
You're welcome to do that. If you want to follow up with her, text me yourself.
Okay.
Yeah, he'll be here on Tuesday. His name's Sergeant McCoy. Okay. You're welcome. Take care.
So yeah, Kevin actually wanted the law enforcement that showed up to escort him to the house to pick up some of his belongings. He wanted to know why they weren't arresting Sherry, as you heard him say. Explain to me why this isn't a robbery. And for starters, Kevin Franke, if this were classified as any type of crime, it would be actually technically a burglary. But aside from that, we hear the cop explaining to him very clearly why Sherry did nothing wrong. And there were several reasons that the officer explained. This is a civil issue. You guys are family. She's been in the house before. You haven't been in the house in a year. She had interest in the items. She didn't take them with the intention to deprive you of them, and that is the theft code. We have to prove intent to deprive you of the items. And that still wasn't good enough for old Kevin here to stop wanting to potentially ruin his daughter's entire frickin' future by having her arrested and charged with residential burglary. And then he says he's going to have that researched further? Get the fuck out of here. I didn't know this information until now, and this changes a lot about how I feel about Kevin. And just looking at him, standing there, literally disappointed that the police aren't going to do anything about Sherry taking an iPad from the home. And we know he's worried. Yes, he's worried about the things that might be on that iPad. Worried about the unscripted things that were caught on video that weren't meant for the world to see. Not just for Ruby's sake, but for himself too. And to me, that shows a consciousness of guilt. Consciousness of his wrongdoings. Because the fact of the matter is, why else would somebody be so adamant about having Sherry charged with a crime for taking the iPad? And besides that, this may have been Ruby's little project, this 8 passengers clusterfuck, but it was Sherry and Chad who provided the entertainment and comedy. And if any 8 passengers content was created or stored on that iPad, to me, Sherry has just as much right to it as her dad seemed to think that he did. And really, being out of the house for a year, I don't think he had any right to suddenly show up out of nowhere and start making claims on everything. He dipped out. Even though he was told to, he wasn't obligated to. I don't know, dreamers. Looking at that body cam video of him for me really shifted those optics that Crystal talked about. The worst part is, these kids, they really do seem like decent young people. I find it astounding that Kevin really, really wished for Sherry to be thrown in the clink just like that over an iPad. There had to be some damning stuff on there, or his devotion to Ruby transcends to a place where water is thicker than blood, and that's just sad. And if this is making us feel some type of way, imagine how painful watching that must have been for Sherry and her siblings. How do you come to terms with that, watching your own father saying that he's going to research ways to have you charged with a crime? Kevin is the most stupidest smart person I've seen in a really long time. He's intelligent, devoted, high-achieving, successful, devoutly Mormon, And this is where his mindset was in the days following the discovery of his children being chained, tortured, and starved by these two evil women. He's sniveling over an iPad and challenging law enforcement's decisions to not charge his eldest. A thing most parents would be overjoyed to be told, but not this guy. Like I said, my whole tone going out of part 2 and into part 3 is changing. Listener Jennifer S. said that she thinks Kevin should have done some jail time, but she can see why it wasn't pursued. He was banished from the home for a year. Mothers often lose custody of children when the father is the abuser due to failure of keeping the child or children safe. But he suffered no similar consequence. He knew Ruby and Jodi were crazy, yet he walked away for a year with seemingly no care for what he left his children to deal with. Sherry continued to text him to inform him of what was happening to the little ones. And you know what, dreamers? I'm going to have to read that book that she wrote. I'm sure that there are tons of details from her inside perspective and her experience that that nobody would be able to access from anywhere else unless you buy and read the book. If Sherry was keeping Kevin in the loop and he still failed to act, then this guy is really out of excuses, especially if he spent that entire year working on himself. However, from the sounds of it, he was probably working on saving his marriage and reconciling with his wife. And like Crystal so eloquently said, kids be damned. Rebecca S. said that Kevin utterly humiliated himself, coming across as weak, complicit, and self-involved. He may well have been a decent person who didn't condone abuse, but he went along with it and blamed it all on brainwashing. This was years of torture that he turned a blind eye to. Shame on him. Also, teaching his kids that it's okay to be passive in the face of abuse is a lifelong lesson that they're going to have to do a great deal of therapy to undo. Any man who leaves his kids with a mentally ill person is not a victim. He's part of the problem. Julie R. said that when Sherry Franke said, "I helped Chad clean his blood off the walls," Kevin was still living there. I believe Stockholm Syndrome is real, but he seemed detached from his kids and turned his head at the abuse because he wanted his wife to love him. Patricia C. said that she thinks it shows us something that his adult children don't speak to him anymore. Yeah, and as someone speaking from personal experience who has mom trauma, there was a period of 8 months when I didn't speak to my mom at all. And while my mother never really followed through on her countless and infinite threats to kick me out or to disown me, there did come a time when she told me in 2019 that I was never welcomed in her house again, and I took that to heart. When she became terminally ill about a year and a half later, she relentlessly asked me to move back to California to take care of her, but I refused to. And I've been judged harshly by some of her siblings, and maybe some of you might feel the same way because of my decision to keep my distance. But I couldn't set aside all the years of pain and abuse and torment that I was subjected to. As time passes, though, guilt does want to start to sink in, and I wonder if I made the right choice, but I did what I did and I can't change that. Like I said, I take things to heart, and there are just things that were said on her part that just couldn't be taken back. And I'm very careful about what I say to my own kid because someday I'm going to need her to take care of me when I'm fixing to kick the bucket too. I'm not too worried about it though, me and my daughter. My daughter and I are good. We're good. Way better than my mom and I ever were. So listener Kimberly W. summed it up, and I completely agree. She said, Kevin is just as responsible for his children. And now that I'm seeing Kevin in a different light, I'm not sure he's doing enough to try to mend that fence with his kids. Maybe too much damage has been done, kind of like how I felt about my mom. Some things can't be undone and some things can't be forgiven. Rebecca M. said, Kevin seems really dumb, but also, how can you walk away from your family? Maybe I'm just not empathetic enough to people who are susceptible to manipulation. I get that, but it's hard when the manipulation is being levied, when there are deep feelings and matters of the heart involved, you know? I don't know. Kevin is, to me, maybe he's just obsessed with Ruby and his marriage and the impact this all has on his standing on the church. Again, it's all about the optics. You work on striving for perfection. If it's difficult or unattainable, as long as everything looks perfect from the outside, then you're good. And last but not least, Urban Henhouse over there on Instagram said Kevin was a very weak and switched off man. He loved the money pouring in at the expense of his kids' well-being. I know that there were some of you who commented after I wrote this episode, and I apologize for not including your comments, but we're already at 2 hours, more than 2 hours, and into close to 2.5 hours. So I'm going to have to cut everyone off here. This is all I've got for the second part. The third part will be up and running soon. Keep an eye on that. Don't forget to come visit me on Facebook and Instagram to discuss this case. And you know, if you join the Facebook group, I have posted in there for almost 8 years now. So if you listen to any of the hundreds of episodes, either on here or on Patreon, you search the keywords when you join the group, and you will be able to find a post where we talked about whatever episode it was that you just listened to. Everything will be up there forever. And I like finding out when someone does listen to an older episode and we get a chance or a reminder of how far we've come and how long we've been at this. But anyway, stay tuned for part 3. That's all I've got for today. I'm your host, Roseanne. This was California Dreaming. And until next time, take care, be safe, and sweet dreams.